Welcome to Lecture 2 in Module 6 of 918, and again continuing to look at this topic of motivation and rewards here. And we're going to actually get into some of the theories in this lecture and then continue that on into the next lecture. And so these are what we call the content theories of motivation. And what these theories came along and did and started kind of mid 20th century and then grew from there. But they've and these theories have kind of stayed with us. And you'll see that we're talking about Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. And I think probably all of us are very familiar with Maslow. You may not be as familiar with our other two we're going to talk about, which is Hertzberg and then Alderfer. But again, we'll get into those. But what happened was people said, again, we see the starting to blend of the psychologists and the organizational theorists, and so this kind of birth of organizational behavior. So what motivates people, but specifically what motivates people at work? And Maslow is one who really crossed that that divide or bridge of the chasm, if you will. He was a psychologist, but then he started working, behavioral psychologist, but then he started working in organizations. I actually have a book on my shelf called Maslow on Management, where he took his famous hierarchy of needs and applied it to management and things like that. And so again, you can get introduced to Maslow in a psychology class, but then you'll also be running into him in management and leadership courses as well. And again, so we're concerned with this, identifying those needs and the drives of people, but then how are they prioritized? So again, if I want to help motivate people at work and encourage them and things like that, how do they prioritize the needs, the desires, the drives, things like that? And of course, early on, we saw this when we talked about classical management or scientific management. The assumption by the scientific management theorists like Frederick Winslow Taylor, the Galbraiths, which again, cheaper by the dozen fame. I don't remember if I mentioned that in those lectures or not. But you have all of these scientific management, time and efficiency, time and motion studies people. To them, the motivation was money. And that's what Taylor did. Taylor offered to those guys working at Bethlehem Steel, he said he would ask them literally, do you want to be a high-priced man? And the idea behind that was if you get really good at your job, then you'll make more money, right? And so you are motivated. Some companies still operate on this. I lived in Ohio at the beginning of the 2000s. At the time, I believe that they've shut down now. There was a basket company called Longaberger Baskets. They were collector baskets. You could have Longaberger parties, things like that. So they were a luxury item. And they were hand woven, all of them. And so you would go to the factory and you could, do a tour and you could walk on this catwalk kind of thing and watch the weavers at work. And man, they were flying. And so we were talking to somebody who had used to work there. They were taking us through. And I said, man, they just work so fast. And they said, well, that's because they are paid. I mean, they have their flat rate, but they're incentivized. The more baskets they weave during an hour, the more money they make. That's scientific management, right? So they were being motivated by that. And then the human relations movement came along and they said, well, wait a minute, we think there's other conditions that help motivate people, things like job security or actual literal security in the word safety kind of considerations. The attention, right? The Hawthorne studies, the attention that managers or supervisors pay to employees. Are they feeling heard and valued? That democratic style of supervision, right? So all of those things contributed to people studying this more and more there within the work environment and what motivates people to do things. So that takes us to Maslow. So we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because my assumption is all of you are familiar with Maslow. He's pretty popular. Like I said, we run into him in psychology classes. We run into him in management and leadership classes. So again, I'm going to assume you're pretty familiar with his hierarchy, right? So you have the physiological needs, the food, the water, the basic necessities of life. Then you have those safety needs, Is the roof going to fall down on my head kind of thing? The social needs. I'm interacting with people and I'm feeling, I have good relationship esteem. And then ultimately self actualization, which, of course, if you know Maslow, he says not many people actually get to that level. And here's the key part about Maslow that's going to come into play in just a couple of minutes when we get to Alderfer. Maslow, his thought was, and that's why it's a hierarchy, you don't move on to the next level until the needs are met at that basic level. So you're not worried about your safety needs until all of your physiological needs are met. And then you're not worried about your social needs until all of your physiological and safety needs are met, and then on up. Hence why it's the pyramid, why it's the hierarchy. And so the one level has to be met before you move to the next. And I remember being introduced to that way back when, and that kind of sticking with me because I thought, well, I don't think I agree with that, because I think it's possible that I can be very, very hungry at the same time. I'm worried about personal relationships and job satisfaction and things like that, right? And of course, he may have said, well, that's different, if you're like starving to death, literally at the point, is that all you're going to think about? But anyway, that's where we're going to get to Alderfer I'm going to talk about Hertzberg first, but when we get to Alderfer, that's what I like about him. He kind of says, I don't know that these lines are hard and fast. So we'll get to that. So that's Maslow. But Maslow set the groundwork, right? He established, hey, there's these different kinds of needs. And I think that was what Maslow really contributed to the discussion, if I can oversimplify his contribution. I don't want to take away from him. But he said, he recognized, you look at the pyramid and it's like, it isn't just basic physiological needs. It's not just money. He talks about social needs, esteem needs, self-actualization, right? There's a lot more driving people than just the basics, right? Which would be the scientific management money. Pay people enough, that way they can meet all their needs and they'll work hard. And Maslow and others came along and said, we think there's more than that. So that's his huge, I would say his most significant contribution. And then we have Hertzberg. I like Hertzberg. I like the way he puts this in. And he calls them hygiene and motivational factors. I'm not entirely sure why he chose the term hygiene. It's just kind of an interesting term to me to choose. But really, I heard another person who was talking about Hertzberg one time called them demotivators and motivators. And I think that's the best way to look at it. So, and in this graph, it calls them dissatisfiers, which is, I think, another good way of thinking about it. And so what Hertzberg did was he took what Maslow talked about and kind of repackaged it. And he said, I agree with Maslow, but at the same time, I'm going to say there are certain things that definitely motivate us in work, but then there are things that they don't motivate us, and hopefully I'll explain this clearly. They in and of themselves don't motivate us, but if they're lacking, they will demotivate us. Probably the easiest one to use as an example would be lights. I mean, literally electric lights, right? So I don't think any of us, correct me if I'm wrong, but in our culture, in our society, we take electricity for granted at our workplace. I don't think any of us get out of bed in the morning and go, the alarm goes off and we go, yes, another day to go to the office where there will be electricity, right? That's not what gets us out of bed in the morning. That's not what, driving to work, woohoo, I get electricity. Not motivated by that. However, if we get to the office and walk in and it's dark in the halls, we get to our office, click on light, no lights coming on, no internet, we're demotivated. We're like, well, what work can I get done? Or we're frustrated, right? We're grouchy. Why? Because that's something that we expect to be there, and it's a demotivator now because it's not there. Or if it's too hot, or if it's too cold. Again, we don't take a comfortable temperature. That doesn't motivate us to work. But boy, if that temperature is off for us, it demotivates us, right? So that's what we mean by a demotivator, and even safety and security. I don't think most of us think about that we work in a nice, solid structure kind of building, and we don't have to worry about the roof falling in and things like that, right? We're not, and I'm not taking that for granted. There are people who work in dangerous working environments, right? So safety is, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. Safety is more of a priority for them. For most of us who work in an office environment, we don't think about safety. But if we should walk in and water's dripping from the ceiling and there's been a leak, now we're starting to think about those things, right? And that can be a demotivator. So again, that's the idea. So Hertzberg says, yeah, there are things that definitely motivate us, and then there are other things that in and of themselves don't motivate but can demotivate. So let's talk about the motivators for just a second. And I'll warn you, I might go a little bit longer on this lecture just because there's a lot to get through with these theories. But so with the motivators, Hertzberg says, and you can see some of them there, you have things like recognition, advancement, just job growth, growth in my job. I'm learning more and I'm developing more, which then can also lead to recognition and advancement and things like that. And his point was those are the things he believed that really motivate us. And so basically, if you think about it, he kind of took Maslow's hierarchy and kind of split it between these two. So Hertzberg would say those physiological safety needs, those fall under the dissatisfiers, the hygiene factors, as he called them, or the demotivators, whereas the motivators, those are in the category of the higher levels on Maslow's pyramid, right? So those are the esteem and self-actualization and maybe social. So that's where he kind of split it. Now, to me, and I think all of that makes sense. A couple of interesting things that Hertzberg pointed out. One is that not all of these factors are the same for every person, meaning take money, for instance. For some people, money, quite frankly, is not a motivator. Assuming that you're making a basic satisfactory level for the job, the position and the task involved. But after that, it doesn't motivate me anymore. The boss can say, I'm going to give you another raise, but the idea is you can only raise my salary so far, but if the job, I'm just not finding it challenging or it's not satisfying, I'm not growing, I'm not advancing, I don't care how much money I'm making, I may stick with the job, I may still do the job, but I'm not enjoying the job. I'm not satisfied in the job, right? Money's not a motivator. Whereas for other people, money is a motivator. And some of that we're going to get into the next lecture talking about achievement-oriented people. The money, it may not even be the money itself that's motivating them. It may be because they connect the money with success, meaning if you give me a bonus, that means I was successful. I hit the mark. I achieved what I wanted to, right? So again, some of these factors will motivate people, but we can't just cross the board and say that'll motivate everybody. Not necessarily. For some people, it may be in the demotivator section. For other people, it may be in the motivator. The other thing Hertzberg observed that I found interesting was over time, something that's in the motivator category can shift to the demotivator. Money would be an instance, right? I'm early in my career and I'm trying to get up to a certain level financially so that we have, my family has financial stability and all of those things. So there's a certain dollar amount. But then after that, that money factor, like I said, might shift to the demotivator. I've used this as an example, I think, in some of the other lectures. Benefits packages. I think at one time benefits packages would have been much more in the motivator category. And maybe for some people they still are. But by and large, I would argue benefits packages have shifted over to the demotivator column. Meaning, I now expect, if I'm going to work for you, I expect a certain number of vacation days. I expect a certain level of a healthcare package and things like that, right? Boom, 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 boom. If you're not offering that to me, or if you start taking benefits away, that's a demotivator. But again, I don't know how many people jump out of bed in the morning and they're like, woohoo, I have good health care. I mean, something, by the way, healthcare insurance. We should be thankful for that, by the way. I think sometimes we're too unthankful, but that's another commentary. Um, but but that's not what motivates us to do my job, right? That the benefits package isn't. I don't keep it on my desk reminding me of my great benefits to help me to do my job better. So that's the idea. So those things can shift. So that's Hartsburg. And then the last one we'll talk about in this lecture, and again, I apologize that it's going a little bit longer than I had wanted to, is Alderfer and the ERG. The ERG, you're like, what is that? If you look at the slide, existence, relatedness, and growth. And basically, and you see on the slide there, Alderfer broke, again, he took Maslow, kind of like Hertzberg did. He took Maslow's hierarchy and broke it into these three categories: existence, relatedness, and growth. So you'll see there the physiological and safety needs. That's what Alderfer called existence. Social self-esteem, that's relatedness, how we relate to other people. And then self-actualization is growth. And Alderfer's big contribution, I'm having a hard time with my words. His big contribution was this. He said, and I already alluded to it, he said, we can be working on all three of these things at the same time. They can all be motivating us. So for instance, Maslow said, if, physiological needs have to be met before you're motivated by the next level. And Alderfer came along and he said, no, really all of them can be at work, or two of the three can be at work at the same time. And why? Well, and I think we all know this, our brains are complex, right? And we're intelligent creatures who can hold multiple priorities at the same time. And I'll give you an example of this. So this was several years ago when I was down in South Carolina, the college where I taught, we had a Center for Leadership Development. And one of the things we did is we would take college students out on backpacking trips. We'd be out for 4 days, 3 nights backpacking in the Appalachian Mountains. Called it our outdoor leadership experience. One of the first times we went, I'm going to try and make a long story short. One of the first times we went, one of our leaders, he was a grad assistant, and these are all, by the way, they're all over 18, so these are all adults, college students. We're still responsible for them, but they're all adults, so we're not being careless. But he took the group, and they headed off in front of me and my co-leader, Casey. And he went down a wrong path. Well, we didn't realize it. Long story short, Casey and I spent the entire day looking for them on these trails. We were back and forth. I mentioned the half marathon. All total that day, I calculated the miles. I didn't run it. I hiked it, backpacked it. I did a marathon that day, a little over a marathon. So it was a long day, and I was stressed, right? Because I need to find this group, make sure they're okay, all of these things. Near the end of the day, and here's where I'm getting to. Near the end of the day, it's getting later afternoon. I had dropped my backpack at our campsite, and I was going back up to look for them. And I did something incredibly foolish. To my shame, and I know better than this as a hiker and a backpacker, I was so, I got to find them. I didn't take the time to fill up my water at a place where I could. So I'm running low on water, and it was a very hot day. I sweat a lot, so I was running out, and I ran out of water. And I still have to climb up because you hiked down. So now I'm hiking back up the side of this mountain. And I was dehydrated. My calf muscles were cramping. I was starting to close in tunnel vision. And right around that time, I came around a corner. There was the group, our college students, our grad assistant coming through. And fortunately, they had water. I got water. I was okay. But again, shame on me. I knew better than that. But anyway, my point is this. As this is happening, and my body is like screaming at me, you're dehydrated, and it's doing all these things, I am thinking about, I need water. Like literally I need water to survive, right? I'm thinking about that. At the same time, I'm still concerned I need to find this group. I need to find these college students, make sure they're okay. At the same time, I'm thinking, you know what? My wife and kids and they're if they knew this was going on, they'd be worried, right? I can hold multiple things in my brain, all of them motivating me to try and get to where I can find some water. And that's why I kept going because I knew there was more water up ahead, hoping I would make it, things like that. So you get the idea. So again, that's where Aldifer came along and he said, I like what Maslow said, but I think we can hold multiple things going on at the same time. And one more thing, because I know I'm at 20 minutes, and again, it's a little bit longer than I wanted to. The main criticism, I will say this, of these content theories, Maslow, Hertzberg, and Aldifer is this. They haven't been super well researched. Now, they'll come in people's theories, but the challenge is how do you actually research these specific things? So from the hardcore researchers, they tend to criticize or critique these areas because they are theories. They have not been proven. So they're still in that theoretical phase even after 50, 60 years. So that's where, again, I just want you to know there is some critique and some criticism of them because we haven't actually done research to say, yep, this is it. Aldifer was right, or Maslow was right, or Hertzberg was right. It's more them kind of taking a step back, looking at human behavior and saying, we think this is what's going on. And I think the reason they've stuck with us, though, is because most of us look at that and we go, yeah, that makes sense. But again, the research hasn't necessarily been done to make sure it's solid. So just want you to know about that as well. And hopefully this was helpful to you. And then we'll see you in the next lecture.